Well, welcome to Boon or Bust, and here we are to talk about AI. Surprise, surprise, artificial intelligence. We're going to really approach the concept of AI fatigue versus AI future. And we're going to kick off really sort of discussing the Reserve Bank's latest research report, if you like, looking at IT and AI specifically in Australia. Peter, I know you've done the hard yard, you've done the analysis, you've read the report. So tell me about it. Is this report worthy of our time, or is it just more hype around AI?
Matt, it's very much worth our time. Let's think about the Reserve Bank. These are the people who set the economic agenda for the country. If anybody knows what's going on in the Australian economy, you've got to say it's the economists at the Reserve Bank. And they've written this very informative report where they've got a study base that they surveyed. And do you know what the report is called, Matt?
No. Enlighten me, Peter.
It's called Technology Investment and AI. What are firms telling us? Okay. So, and they did this in August this year. So it's very recent stuff. It's Australian based. And let me give you some facts, Matt, and let's debate some of these facts that the report's telling us. Firstly, IT investment in Australia has been growing strongly by 80% over the past decade. Are you surprised at that at all?
I'm a little bit surprised, Peter, because if you look at the results that are coming out of organisations from their IT investments, they don't necessarily align, if you like, with that amount of investment, right?
Yeah.
And we think about the challenges that we've talked about before around productivity, stalling, and so on. Surely, if we're spending that much money, things should be increasing exponentially across those areas.
Well, there's some insights that we've got to delve into on this sort of stuff. It doesn't surprise me in the sense that I believe organisations are increasingly digital organisations. So basically the function...
But are they increasingly digital, or do they think they're increasingly digital?
Oh, very much so, man, very much so. We're all good looking, aren't we?
Indeed, that's right.
Well, so I think firms are functioning through investments in technology. Are they using it to transform, or are they doing it to keep the wheels running of the business? I think that's part of the discussion that we're going to have today.
I think you're right, because also when you consider that from the AI perspective, Peter, as well, the interesting thing is, like, you talk about this investment, we talk about becoming digitally aware, digitally capable, that sort of thing, ultimately. But for many organizations, particularly when you start getting up into the CFO, the CEO, and the board, it's kind of like, you've spent this money, no more. Where's the results, right? But, AI, it's like going to the gym, Peter. One workout alone is not going to make you Arnold Schwarzenegger, right?
It most certainly isn't, Matt. It will require at least 2 for me to get there. But it's also what you're saying there, Matt, is outcomes are rarely instantaneous. They evolve, they're gradual, you embed a way of working in an organization and you get more capable of it. I was thinking about this morning. It's a bit like learning to drive a car. That first time you get behind the wheel when you're 17 and it seems completely incomprehensible, this clutch control and all this sort of stuff you've got to do. But over time, you get more familiar with it, and then it becomes a way of life for you. And I think really what we're underestimating in Australia is that learning transition to go from one way of working to a new way of working, and the cultures and practices that are required to do that. But I think one thing I want to talk about this report was one of the motivations. They said, why are people spending on technology? They discounted the fact of a competitive necessity. They did it for boosting customer experience and the service that they're delivering. And I thought that was quite interesting because you think in the modern world, we're all behind the 8 ball if we're not sort of as technology literate as others. But I think it's like they say in everything, think about the customer first. How can we make their lives better and get better through that way, rather than how can we defeat the people who are our competitors?
Yeah, I'm interested, Peter, because, we talk a lot about the customer. Okay, sure, the customer brings in the revenue, brings in the business. We got to think about how we differentiate with them. But equally within organizations as well, customers are the people, the employees and so on. And, within a Reserve Bank, we've seen obviously ongoing investments in things like cloud and data and that sort of thing as well. And, the report kind of indicates that they're not necessarily expecting, mass layoffs within industry in general, but they are expecting it to help us retrain and improve productivity within people. All sounds lovely, doesn't it? But when you start looking at the facts, I just read this morning, the number of layoffs in the US has hit 1.1 million this year, right? 1.1 million. It's the highest we've seen even during the global financial crisis. We didn't see that level of layoffs. So it's all very well and good. I can sit there, you can sit there. We can all say it's wonderful. We need to retrain people. We need to reassign them into more productive areas. But the fact of the matter is, Peter, most people within organizations are sitting there thinking, when am I next?
Yeah.
What does this mean for me? So how do we kind of overcome that challenge around all the positivity and hype around technology when for most people, they just think it's going to take my job?
Well, there was a quote from the RBA report that I thought worth sharing, which said, while evidence suggests that labor-creating effects of past technologies have generally outweighed the labor-replacing effects. So in effect, more jobs have been created because of technology to keep the technology running than automating or replacing people who did old ways of working. But I think that's an interesting perspective because the report also highlights about 7% of the Australian populace are working directly in IT. That's a significant part of the economy.
So we think 7% of the populace are working in IT. That is a very significant number.
Well, populace is probably the wrong. I should say working people.
Oh, working people. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So 7% of the working people. So yeah, agree. Big number. But I also know, and I've seen reports over the last couple of years saying that we're going to need probably 1 million more people. Yeah. And I just, the numbers don't stack up to me, Peter. We talk about 7%. We talk about we need another 1 million people. And then the next breath, we're saying we're going to lay off 1 million people.
Well, Matt, let me give you the pub test. Okay. When you're in the pub and you say, where do you work, Matt? And you say IT, do other people around you say, I work in IT, I work in IT? Are all your friends just IT people? You don't know anybody outside the IT industry?
I have got some other friends, Peter. All right.
Are they intimidated by your IT experience?
Not really, although I have found it increasingly difficult over 30 years of being an IT research analyst to actually explain to people what I do. It's kind of this mystery job, but it's interesting as well because when you think about the areas that you're talking about as well, you kind of almost got this. I think we call it the J curve effect, right? You need short-term pain for long-term gain, and the RBA says, improving productivity takes time. Yeah. There's no short-term fix here. But we've been going backwards for the last 20 years. Yeah. So with all this investment you talk about as well. So what's the answer here? Because saying long-term gain will come, that's not going to resonate with the board. They can say we do not have the luxury of long-term gain thinking anymore, Matt.
Now, Matt, you tend to accuse me of being somewhat cynical about the IT industry.
I think I'm sounding cynical at the moment.
Well, I wondered whether what you were saying is really IT that carrot and we're the donkey that are never going to get that carrot. So the promise of this golden world ahead of us. But I think it's hard to actually say that. I'm going to come back and say my life has changed through technology. I think of all the ways we work and live. And, I look at my children.
I'm not a technology skeptic, Peter. I'm a hype of technology skeptic.
Well, and this is an important thing, Matt. But we are employed in an industry that's in many ways fueled by that hype. That hype is what generates momentum in that industry. And sometimes you feel a bit like the outsider when you say, look, is it really that benefit? Are we really going to get that benefit? But let's go to AI, Matt, because one thing the report said was that Australia was actually lagging most of the other developed world in terms of AI. And it said where AI is being most enthusiastically embraced is economies that are perhaps less advanced than some Western countries.
I was thinking the same way, Peter, in terms of, look at the productivity index. We're number 22 this year, as I've mentioned before. We were 23 this year. New Zealand's lagging with us as well, so we're in great company there. But I was talking to the head of a global consulting firm this morning, out of the US. He's in the US, very nice. Fire on. I've got shorts on this morning. He has the fire on. But anyway, and he actually said to me, in terms of the conversations that he's having in the US right now, are very similar to what we're having. Like, we think we're lagging. Yeah. But he said to me, many are haven't even got to that POC stage.
Yeah.
There's a lot of not resistance, but I think a lot of hesitancy starting to creep in with a lot of US enterprises he's talking to and his people talk to, because they're not seeing those returns. Short-term pain, long-term gain. Long-term gains in a world where ROI needs to be not 2 years, but 8 months.
Yeah.
Long-term gain is just not cutting it. So I think we knock ourselves around here in Australia, but the US is not necessarily, apart from pockets like we have, doing anything more, exponentially greater than we are when it comes to AI. At least that conversation, that was like 9 o'clock this morning.
Well, and you can think, Matt, there's Silicon Valley, so we're way behind those people. But if you go to the broader populace, is what you're saying, there's no way Australia is a laggard compared to a lot of parts of the US.
Yep.
But I was looking, though, what the RBA said, what are the reasons that hold Australians back? And there's a sort of skepticism in the firms they're interviewing about sort of letting go, trusting AI. And I think in Australia, part of that could well be the experience of robo-debt, where we put too much trust in AI, an earlier iterate of AI, machine learning rather than big language models. But people lost lives because of that. And that certainly, I think, clouded people's confidence in trusting AI explicitly.
Yeah, that's a great point. So tell me, Peter, so we're here right now with AI at this certain stage. What's success look like to you when it makes you a cup of coffee or something in the morning?
No, I don't want that. I don't want to be a complete sort of bedridden person served by some AI robot. I want to have an active life, certainly. But I think that AI is, how can it enhance? I mean, the word seems to be augment the way I work. I like to do my weekly shopping. I like to get stuff. I get stuck in, where can I get Promite? Because I don't eat Vegemite. I'm a Promite man. And
Peter, I've lived in Australia since 1986, and I've never met anybody who eats Promite.
Well, I eat Promite, and you will.
Okay.
And Fran eats Promite as well. So there's two of us. Fran is our accountant in a place where we work. So there are pockets of Promite. Passionate people
so
around
maybe
the world.
they're the canaries in the coal mine when it comes to
AI.
AI.
In Coles or Woolworths. Where's the Promite? And I can't find it. Okay. It would be great to sort of go, AI?
Yeah.
Where's the Promite? Peter, go to R4. Down there, low thing. Right. That would be a nice thing for my life. I could benefit from that sort of stuff.
So you need to make it real to the individuals. I think ultimately what we're saying here is that the future is brewing, right? Even if the machine's still warming up in many ways.
Well, Matt, but I also think I've been in IT industry for 40 years now, and I've seen waves of technologies that have changed the world. The PC, the internet, the mobile phone. I've got no doubt AI is going to be one of those waves of change. But like you worked in a former employer, you had this great thing called the hype cycle, Matt. So you better share with the listeners who may not be aware of that. Just what is the insight of the hype cycle?
Well, the hype cycle ultimately lets you get a sense of like a trigger, technology trigger. We all jump on board. We're all excited, and we're at the top of the hype cycle of.
And what's the top called?
The top is called the peak of expectations, right? And then we tumble headfirst into that trough of disillusionment before we get to that plateau of productivity. So coming back to that J curve, right? So the plateau of productivity is that long-term gain at the end of the day. So I think that sets us up very well for our next conversation, Peter, where we're going to sort of, I think, expand on the productivity side of things when we consider the RBA's report, whether productivity is, is it achievable, is it magic, or is it myth?